Vanakkam and good evening to everyone. Thank you, Anil. That was a really nice introduction, and I wish you well in your career. I have two daughters, and neither of them wanted to do law because they said, we can see that our parents are working too hard and not making any money. So they didn't do law. I wish you well, though. And I also want to thank His Excellency, Dr. Nagub Muttu, for his fine introduction. Before I speak about the award, I'm going to respond to Dr. Sampath's request that I also make a few remarks about peace and reconciliation. So firstly, thank you very much to the Madras Development Society for inviting me, and congratulations for inaugurating this Nelson Mandela Centenary International Conference on Peace and conflict, and for the installation of a statue in honor of Mr. Mandela in the city of Chennai. I hope as soon as this virus lifts that I will be traveling to Chennai to see the statue for myself. Nelson Mandela is revered for leading South Africa out of oppression and conflict into peace and democracy, and he is also acclaimed internationally as the greatest moral leader of our time. Now, this is a very important message for all leaders, all political leaders today, to recognize what society expects of them once they get into power. Mr. Mandela renounced the path of vengeance and retribution, and so he carried the South African nation with him in achieving peace and reconciliation and a united country. Now, many people have quoted his own wonderful words, so I won't be doing that. Let me pause to say how honored I feel to join the illustrious panel of speakers. It's indeed a privilege to join them. However, I do point out that they are all representatives of governments so far. So I speak for the people. My life has always been as a human rights activist, lawyer, and judge. And as you know, the position of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights is to bring out the voice of the voiceless. Now, with regard to peace, Mandela said that peace is the most powerful weapon any community of people has to bring about stability and progress through development. Now, as you know, the United Nations work rests on three pillars: peace and security, human rights and the rule of law, and development. And these three pillars are indivisible, they're interdependent. One pillar can't be achieved without fulfillment of the other. So if human rights are being violated, there can be no meaningful peace. And without peace and human rights, there can be no sustainable development. So this means that when we look at peace and reconciliation, we have to adopt a holistic approach in order to achieve that. And this is why Mandela stated that peace and democracy go hand in hand. What did he mean by democracy? He was thinking of accountable governments, that the role of governments is to work in cooperation with people. You are accountable to the government. But more and more in international conflicts, we see that state actors engage in shooting and killing the people. Protests all over the world are being suppressed. Freedom of speech is being denied. Dissent is not allowed. Now, none of this makes for good governance. Over the past decades, the international community has advanced steadily in setting standards for the protection of human rights, for safeguarding the environment for the whole world, and for ensuring peaceful resolution of conflicts. A key driver of these changes has been collective action of civil society, pursued with energy and resilience. In fact, there would not have been an office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the UN had it not been for pressure and push from civil society. So this is my message today, that we need governments to work collectively with civil society and not against them. Now, even now, in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, ordinary people are taking to the streets in their thousands to protest inequalities and discrimination. Campaigns such as Black Lives Matter, the Me Too campaign, campaigns against rape and sexual harassment and gender-based violence in India, South Africa, and many other countries, and protests by civil society against authoritarian rule. These are all powerful voices demanding change, and governments must stop and listen to those voices. Now, as we know, the United Nations reaches its 75th anniversary. And it's a chilling fact that the inspiring promise of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that all human beings are born equal in dignity and rights, is still only a dream for far too many people, for millions of people in India. The World Bank estimates that 50 million people will be pushed into extreme poverty, not just poverty, but extreme poverty. The economic, social, and health impacts of COVID-19 highlight challenges of poverty, conflict, human rights abuse, and a host of setbacks. And who suffers the most? The poor, women, and those who are marginalized. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, has identified that the biggest threat to world peace today is the move against multilateralism. Now, if you are standing for unilateralism, as President Trump has, and some other strongmen in some other countries are following his example and declaring that their countries come first, their interests and their agendas come first, then the Secretary General says that kind of unilateralism is the biggest threat to world peace. So we have to understand that no single country can fight COVID-19 on its own, and no single country can achieve an end to conflict and achieve peace unless they work together. So multilateralism is the way forward. The collected action of all states in cooperation with civil society is necessary. We need to act globally right now to stem the rising tide of illiberal trends, such as nationalism that Minister Praveen Gordhan mentioned, populism and authoritarianism that threaten our peaceful coexistence. We need to act in solidarity to safeguard the planet against climate change, against threats to peace, and to ensure the promotion and protection of human rights of all persons. The Honorable Chief Minister of Pondicherry outlined to us the external threats outside its borders that India faces. And I truly sympathize with that, because it is a matter of huge anxiety to me that the people of Kashmir have not realized their human rights even after a 50-year struggle. So these are all the situations immediately surrounding India. But let me spend a moment looking at the internal situation. Not only has the virus affected India and South Africa in many terrible ways, in that we are losing lives, here in India, a virulent strand of Hindu nationalism labels other social groups as enemies, as anti-nationals or second-class citizens. I recall in June 2019, there was a proposed draft education bill making the teaching of Hindi compulsory across India, and that was defeated in Tamil Nadu after public protests. I recall too the massive marches across India and in the outside world against the Citizenship Amendment Act. The CIA supposedly grants a path to citizenship for refugees from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, but it excluded Muslims, a clear violation of international human rights law and international refugee law. And I heard a central question being asked here in Tamil Nadu, which was, if the central government was so concerned over protecting minority Hindus fleeing persecution from its neighboring countries, why did the law not include Tamil Hindu refugees from Sri Lanka, who number 100,000 in India, 60,000 of whom live in camps in Tamil Nadu? So external and internal conflicts need to be addressed, and the road to reaching that is to ensure that we protect everyone's human rights. Democratic values and institutions that respect human rights in India need strong civil society defenders at this time to ensure the peaceful coexistence of all, to ensure accountability and justice for all, and to ensure cultural rights, language rights, and religious freedom for all. Mandela was a champion of human rights for all, actively promoting equality, justice, non-discrimination as the foundation of the new democracy. And he led by sheer example. He moved away from bloodshed and vengeance and small-mindedness. He never gave in to bitterness and narrow-minded beliefs. He showed us that we cannot ever be truly free at the expense of the freedom of others. Now, you've heard the law of force, and you've heard about the force of law. There is also the power of inclusion, the strength of empathy, the deep pull of justice, and the magnetism of forgiveness and love. When Nelson Mandela created reconciliation in South Africa, a country scarred by generations of racial exploitation and injustice, love triumphed over fear and hate.
That's a problem.
Empathy and inclusion triumphed over domination, power, and greed. So if we want to achieve reconciliation, we have to ensure justice is done for all victims, that perpetrators of serious crimes are held accountable, even if they are serving on governments, they must be held accountable. And for reconciliation to be meaningful, there has to be reparation for victims. So these are the few conditions. And of course, many challenges still face us, and I hope that the values that Nelson Mandela incarnated, fairness, equality, and dignity, remain vivid for all of us. Mandela's legacy remains. He's gone, but his legacy remains. His example, his leadership, his extraordinary achievements will remain the benchmark against which other leaders all over the world will be measured for many years to come. Let me say how deeply honored I am to be the recipient of the first Nelson Mandela International Peace Award. Mr. Nelson Mandela directly influenced my life and work. I had never met him, but obviously he followed the work from prison of lawyers who were representing opponents of apartheid and doing so without charging fees and so on. Well, I think that he noticed my work because he, as someone said, he did appoint me as the first woman judge. It was actually the first non-white woman ever in South Africa, but the first woman judge in democratic South Africa. And then he phoned me. I was very surprised. I received this call at home very early in the morning. I understood that he used to be up at 5 in the morning and started working. So I was very surprised to see to receive a very early morning call from him. And he said, "Congratulations on your appointment as an acting judge. It gives me great joy. I hope it will be permanent soon." But before it became permanent, Mr. Mandela nominated me to the United Nations General Assembly, a first appointment, first nomination by Democratic South Africa for a high-level post. And that's why I was elected as a judge to serve on the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. I am the granddaughter of indentured laborers. My paternal grandfather was Alugari Sami Narayan Sami Naidu, who left his native village, Palia Batilagundu, outside the city of Madurai in 1880. And he worked as a cutter in the British-owned sugarcane plantations in Natal. And as you know, Mahatma Gandhi described the conditions of indenture as slave labor. My maternal grandfather came from Pondicherry, and he was rather a distinguished man who even knew how to speak French. He didn't work in the sugarcane plantations, but he also was an indentured laborer. Now, as High Commissioner for Human Rights, a few years ago, on my visit to India, I was honored by an audience with former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and I was honored formally by the Supreme Court of India. Now, both these occasions were deeply moving spiritual moments for me because I thought of my grandfather's sacrifices and the sacrifices of all the Indian indigenous laborers, particularly the Tamils, who paved the way so that I could return to India one day and be honored. And so today I'm equally deeply touched and honored to be bestowed the Nelson Mandela International Award for Conflict Resolution. I received this award in the name of all the Indian indentured laborers who pioneered Indian settlement in South Africa. So thank you very much to the Madras Development Society.